Who's the best Valorant player ever? It's an impossible question, but with the help of casters and analysts from across the VCT, I'm going to try and answer it. Of course, the game's only been out for 3 years, so it's unlikely we've even seen the GOAT yet, but let's take a look at the best players in Valorant so far and decide who's the greatest of them all. First up is the face of Valorant, the mechanical demon, TenZ. You might be surprised to see him here with his fall-off during 2022, but I'll be judging players in their prime as opposed to where they are now, and TenZ's prime was on Sentinels in early 2021. He came in as an emergency sub, despite retiring from competition a few months earlier, which sent the entire community into a frenzy. From his first game in the roster, he dominated teams left and right, which qualified Sentinels to the first international event in Valorant, Masters Reykjavik 2021, and once he got to Iceland, he didn't stop. Sentinels won the whole thing without dropping a map, in large part because of TenZ's monstrous performances. He still holds the record for the highest ACS at an international tournament, and is the only player ever to get over a kill per round. TenZ completely dominated everyone at Masters Reykjavik, so he seems like the obvious choice, but there's questions to be asked about the standard of Valorant back then. It was arguably easier for duelist players to have impact, as the strategic level of the game was much lower than it is now. That shouldn't take away too much from TenZ's performance though, as he's proving with the current Sentinel squad that he's capable of playing at top level nowadays too. But before we move on to the next player, a bit more on how we're going to answer the question. While working on this video, I sent a survey to all of the VCT casters and analysts asking that question. They each gave me their top 3 Valorant players of all time, and a reason for why they chose certain ones. And for TenZ, Wyatt says, the numbers TenZ put up in Iceland will likely never be beaten. Even though it was earlier in the game, the margin at which he was the best player at the time was larger than at any other point for other candidates. He pioneered the jet mechanics that have defined the agent for everyone that followed him. He's also had a huge impact as a content creator as well as a player, but I'm not going to judge players on their Twitter followers. If I did, we wouldn't have any EU players, so... Next on the list is a player tearing it up in franchising, but whose peak in mid-2021 changed how Valorant was played forever. Nats during Masters Berlin wasn't the typical best player type. He didn't play as duelists and wasn't overly aggressive. In fact, it was the opposite. His signature agents are Viper and Cypher, and he controlled the map by lurking through the enemy backlines, by avoiding fights instead of taking them. Gambit's 13-0 on Icebox vs G2 shows off his playstyle perfectly. He infiltrated their defenses without them even realizing. His lurks began to change the way Pro Valorant was played, and setups he created all the way back in 2021 are still used by top teams today. Bangovich highlighted that in his choice. Honestly, I do think that he had probably the highest impact on the game out of everyone ever. The amount of setups and ideas which were stolen from him following his peak performance is insane, and on top of that, he was just unstoppable. That's what makes Nats such a great player, not just his aim or incredible game sense or the paranoia he puts into his opponents, but his unique playstyle that still echoes through Pro Valorant to this day. Most of the pros on this list were feared by anyone who had to play against them, and Sentinels is no exception. In his prime, he was the best operator player Valorant has ever had. If he was watching an angle, you just shouldn't peek it. So much so that in Masters Berlin, 100 Thieves made a 7-round comeback just by rushing to the other site whenever they saw him. But it wasn't until Champions that Sentinels showed his true form. Acend are a good team, but they were by no means the favourites. Until they were. The kill sound of his Prism operator haunted anyone who faced it, as they dominated their way to the grand final versus Gambit and Prime Nats. It was an extremely close match, but Acend became the first Valorant champions, spearheaded by Sentinels and his operator. Ryan Central explains Sentinels' play like this. He didn't have a TenZ-like performance at Champions, but it was however the first time we really saw a duelist fall into a great game plan for Acend. Sentinels at Champions was a masterclass in how to approach duelists and opping. There's very few players who could ever challenge his op, but one of them is Ye. Ye is probably the most obvious answer to the question of this video. Most players here have 1 or 2 tournaments that could be classed as their prime, but Ye had pretty much the entire year of 2022. He received the Esports Player of the Year award at the end of it, and it was completely deserved. He was already playing insane in 2021 on Envy, but when they rebranded to OpTic at the start of the new year, he went into demon mode. He had the highest KD at Masters Reykjavik, leading his team to a title win, an insane performance at Copenhagen, and another Grand Finals appearance at Champions with the highest rating and KD across the whole tournament. His nickname was literally El Diablo. I think the stat that summarizes him the most is that he went negative in only 2 out of 52 series he played since joining Envy in 2021. Ye's ultimate strength was his consistency. He rarely dipped in form and was a major reason why OpTic are considered one of the best teams ever in Valorant. Sideshow agrees. Not only did Ye hit outrageous levels of dominance during the Chamber meta, he was also unbelievable during the Jet meta of 2021 at Masters Berlin and Champions 2021. Despite not winning either of those events, he outperformed the MVP candidates from the winning teams both times. But 2023 hasn't exactly been Ye's year. After being dropped from C9 for being too expensive, he hasn't looked great on a struggling DSG team. You'd expect someone who was playing consistently so well at the top level to smurf in tier 2, but he really hasn't been. And that made people question if Ye's success in 2022 was really down to him as a player, or more to do with how he was set up on OpTic by the likes of FNS and Victor, and the ease of finding impact with a busted chamber. However, Sideshow refutes this, saying, "The current consensus is that Ye was only an elite player due to the power of chamber, ignoring the fact that many other legendary GOAT candidate players were competing against him on perma chamber at the same time, and none of them managed to hit the same heights with the same consistency that he did, working with the same kit." But when talking about the OpTic team, a mention has to be given to Marved. He wasn't as consistent as Ye in 2022, but the Iceman lived up to his nickname in the big games, especially at Masters Reykjavik. 35 kills in the lower final to save them from Zeta's miracle run, the fracture ace versus the guard, and a huge performance versus Loud to bring them over the line in the grand final. When he was locked in, his read on the game was second to none. He's showing it these days IGLing for Sentinels, and in his prime, it was clear how much better that made him individually. Ye and Marved were GOATed in 2022, but OpTic only won one of the 3 international tournaments that year. The second was Masters Copenhagen, which was won by FPX. Most of the players on this list were tournament MVPs, but not many of them can say they single-handedly won their team a tournament. Xiao probably can though. FPX played the group stage of Copenhagen with a sub because Sagetsu's visa was late, and Xiao's individual play and clutches carried them through to the playoffs, where Sagetsu returned. Xiao didn't slow down though, and he kept reversing their fate on rounds that should have been unwinnable. Over the course of the tournament, he had 21 clutches. The second highest amount across all international tournaments ever in Valorant is 14. That's 1.5 times higher for Xiao. When he was alive, you could never count FPX out. Sagetsu was also incredible at Copenhagen, and together, the duo made that crazy lower bracket run possible. Both of them deserve recognition for that tournament, even if they're not the first names that pop up when asking the GOAT question. Someone who does usually pop up in the conversation though is Aspas, the relaxed executioner. He's another duelist player feared by everyone who faces him, and was an integral part of Loud's success last year, which culminated in their win at Champions. He's kept up that form in 2023 too, and a lot of the community would call him the best player in the world right now as we head into Masters Tokyo. His jet is incredible, with probably the best usage of her mobility in the whole world, but he's flexible too, with a great raise and newly shown neon. He's almost the perfect duelist player. Insane mechanics, aggressive without constantly overpeaking, and versatile in both gunplay and agent flexibility. I don't know if he's put up enough tournament MVP performances yet to justify him being the best Valorant player ever though, but if Loud wins Tokyo, I could definitely see that changing. And there's another member of Loud who definitely has a shot too, and that's Les. At just 17 years old, he was one of the best Sentinel players in the world without a doubt, and has also continued that in VCT Americas. He's almost keeping up with Aspas in terms of stats, which is not easy to do when you're playing a role that inherently gets less impact. Not only is his individual play incredible, but apparently he's also learning to IGL. If he becomes the full IGL for this team, and keeps up an individual level like this, he's 100% a candidate for the best Valorant player in a few years. But all of the players I've spoken about so far have only won one international event. There's only a single player in Valorant who's won 2, Chronicle. Masters Berlin 2021 with Gambit, in which he MVP'd over Nats, and then lock-in with Fnatic. It's hard to say when his prime exactly was, or if we've even seen it yet, but one thing's for sure, he's the single most accomplished Valorant player. He's played almost every agent in the game at a top level, and proven his dominance on multiple teams. Ex-Warrior says, to be the best, you have to consistently find yourself at the top. Chronicle has done just that. He backs up the trophies with his stats too. He has some of the lowest early death rates, making his utility always relevant to his team's success, and you cannot forget his insanely high clutch rate also. Chronicle's impact might not always be as direct as a star duelist, but it is consistently felt in the biggest moments. Not to mention the team he's on currently, who have multiple players that could be in this GOAT debate too. Alpha and Leo are incredible players who seem to be getting better and better by the day. With this team, he could be the first to win 5 or even 10 international events. We'll have to wait and see. But there's another player on Fnatic who I decided to include in the list I sent out, and that's Durka. Bren put Durka's biggest strength best. Incredible consistency since the dawn of VCT. Durka has been on Fnatic since the very beginning, in that first grand final versus Sentinels all the way back in 2021. And ever since then, through Fnatic's failures and triumphs, Durka has been putting up superb numbers in every tournament. He's a master of all trades duelist. He can rifle, op, and entry to a level not many can match. He's consistently improved over the past 3 years of the VCT while managing to stay at the top, and for that, he definitely deserves a spot. Some of the best players in Valorant haven't won a title though, and I wanted to mention the 2 GOATs of Pacific, Mako and Jing. They're pretty much polar opposites. Mako has been the most consistent controller player for over 2 years straight, being a top 10 rated player in every tournament since Masters Reykjavik 2022, where he was actually number 1. He's arguably the best player on the best Asian team ever in Valorant. In other words, he's the best Asian player. Jing is probably a close second, especially in his prime at Masters Copenhagen. PaperX were only one map away from winning the entire thing, with Jing literally smurfing on top teams. He had no fear in losing an aim duel, and fair enough, because he pretty much couldn't. Until he lost the most important one of all. If PaperX had won that Breeze map, Jing would probably be higher on most people's lists, but the lack of a trophy for the Pacific region brings their players down in this debate. So those are my candidates for Valorant's GOAT. Now it's time to choose one. Like I said before, the game's only been out for 3 years, and so many of the players listed here are still playing and may get even better than their supposed prime. I'm sure we'll even get a new player who surpasses all of these at some point. But right now, looking at the Valorant history we've had so far, the general opinion across the VCT is that the best Valorant player ever is Durka. Durka received the most votes of any player in this video. He was tied for the most first place, second place, and third place votes with different players, but much like his career in Valorant so far, his consistency pushed him to the top. The fact that he's constantly put up incredible performances for Fnatic and driven them forward over the years makes him the winner of this vote. Tied for second place were Ye and Mako. Ye was picked first more times than Mako, but was picked second 0 times, which hurt his overall point total. Mako was rated highly by most, again due to his incredible consistency. I did ask people to rate players in their prime, but when thinking about the best Valorant player ever, consistency plays a huge part. Aspas ranked 4th, just below. A lot of second place votes for him make you wonder if he will become Valorant's best ever player. Nats and Chronicle were tied on points below him, which is a nice nod to the Gambit team of old, and Tens landed one spot under them. But casters and analysts don't necessarily reflect the whole community, and that's why I want you to answer the question too. Look in the description or the comments of this video for the form and put your answers in. Hopefully we can get thousands of responses and answer the question once and for all. But for now, I've been Commend, I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.